Welcome to Sources Tell Jeff Passan. I am Jeff Passan. And today's story starts in 2014, less than 2 years after a consortium led by a Chicago investor named Mark Walter finalized its $2.15 billion purchase of the Los Angeles Dodgers. Two women named Clarice Whitmore and Helga Maria Schulsky filed a federal class action lawsuit in Illinois against the company that Mark Walter owns and runs, Guggenheim. The 105-page complaint is a sprawling, thorough account that alleges that premiums paid by Whitmore and Schulsky for annuities were not put into the safe, low-risk investments typically associated with annuities and other life insurance products. And the complaint laid out a tangled web of financial transactions that alleged Mark Walter took premiums from insurance companies that he owned and funneled them directly into other businesses he owned, affiliated companies in the industry parlance. One of those, the complaint said, was the Los Angeles Dodgers. More than half of the money used to fund the team's purchase, the complaint alleged, came from annuity payments. Less than 24 hours after the complaint was filed, the lawsuit was dismissed, and while nobody involved has publicly addressed the case, here's the truth: a quick settlement was reached to make it go away. 12 years later, the same sort of story is unfolding in a far different manner. No longer is Mark Walter a relatively anonymous investor who took over the Dodgers and watched them win 3 World Series. He also bought the Los Angeles Lakers and the Los Angeles Sparks and a portion of the Chelsea Football Club. He started the Women's Professional Hockey League. He owned stakes in F1, IndyCar, and NASCAR teams. And that's just the sports portfolio. Walter is the CEO of Guggenheim Partners, a financial behemoth whose assets under management since his purchase of the Dodgers has nearly tripled to around $370 billion. Walter is also the CEO of TWG Global, a holding company for all of the sports assets, AI plays, and perhaps most important, insurance companies. Because right now, federal investigators are probing him over the use of insurance cash and whether Mark Walter intentionally misled regulators and skirted rules intended to keep investments safe and policyholders solvent. Between now and December 31st, Mark Walter needs to replace more than $20 billion in questionable insurance loans to his own businesses with money tied to unaffiliated companies. Already, Walter has agreed to sell the Lakers a $12.5 billion deal that would net him around $8 billion. He's in talks to divest his stake in Chelsea too, and TWG, the holding company he runs, has pledged to swap $6.5 billion in unaffiliated investments for the insurance company's affiliated ones. The entire financial industry right now is laser focused on Walter, not just because of the potential legal exposure, but questions about the future of the empire he has built. And the sports industry is likewise training its eyes on him, wondering if the thing that allowed him to buy the Dodgers, insurance money, will be ultimately what forces him to sell them too. At the intersection of the past and present is our guest today. Tom Gober is a forensic accountant and certified fraud examiner who runs deep dive analytics, and over his career has worked with the FBI and U.S. Attorney's Office in their efforts to help root out financial corruption. In 2014, Tom built the case that claimed Walter and his partners, as written in the complaint, quote, used the Guggenheim insurers as a cash machine to buy the most expensive sports franchise in world history, the Los Angeles Dodgers, with over $1 billion in policyholder funds. Tom, thank you so much for joining us. We got a lot to get into today. And
Good.
this is not just going to be about the Los Angeles Dodgers either. This is a story that impacts the entire American economy and millions of retirees, something you've been speaking eloquently and forcefully about for some time. But I can't let the incredibly pointed language drawn up by the lawyers in that complaint go by. So, Tom, can you explain how Mark Walter used an insurance company as a cash machine to buy the Los Angeles Dodgers?
Sure. And let me say this, it's a bigger issue that he used the money to purchase something for his own benefit, but that he didn't disclose that he was doing that. You couldn't tell from the reporting that policyholders were providing cash to buy the Dodgers. But unfortunately, a number of carriers today have really high levels of affiliated investments. So, what we alleged is that by having access to policyholder funds and not disclosing it, he's able to do what we call enjoy self dealing. Is that fair?
And that is a certainly a loaded term, but the sort of thing that the government is looking into. And we're eventually, Tom, going to get into the nitty gritty of all the things associated with the Dodgers, their sweetheart TV deal, the deferred money that they have in salaries, and just how much of their success could be owed to the complicated financial system that is Walter's companies. There's a lot to unpack. There's a lot to address, but context here is important. And this is tricky stuff. Understanding the basics is paramount. So let's start at the beginning of this current mess. In spring of 2025, a whistleblower complaint alleged questionable practices in how Guggenheim Investments booked revenue tied to its insurance companies. In September 2025, after this complaint had been lodged and after authorities began looking into Walter, Guggenheim, and all of the affiliated businesses in that ecosystem, Walter was flying home from British Columbia, and FBI agents boarded his jet and took his cell phone and laptop. The Financial Times later reported that law enforcement did the same with Dina DiLorenzo, the president of Guggenheim Investments. As somebody who has been for 40 plus years now, Tom, involved in this area of the industry and in building these sorts of cases, how long do they take to build, and how does one go about doing it?
Well, first of all, I have worked on criminal cases for about a dozen years, all involved in life and annuity and other types of insurance where wrongdoing was proven. People went to prison. We got money back for the policyholders. In this case, because there is a criminal case at one level and you also have the SEC involved, it'll probably take a while. I've seen it take 3 to 4 years, even longer, but I would think 3 to 4 years is a safe bet.
Well, the case proceeded quietly. There was no word of it publicly in the reported media or financial media until July 20th of this year, when Zachary Aramider and Ava Benny Morrison of Bloomberg News broke the news that federal prosecutors were investigating Guggenheim as well as two of its insurance companies, Delaware Life and Clear Spring. And much of this dates back to the 2008 housing collapse and subsequent financial crisis. New laws were passed to tighten lending from banks. Investors aren't going to stop trying to make their money, though. And in their quest for alpha, they found a sector flush with cash: insurance. Private capital companies started buying insurance brokers, and Mark Walter and Guggenheim were among the earliest adopters. Delaware Life and Clear Spring were two of them, and They looked, according to end of 2025 filings with regulators, like typical insurance companies with an acceptable amount of affiliated investments. According to Alert, which is a financial research company that monitors the insurance industry for insolvency, ClearSpring originally reported $458.5 million in affiliated investments, and Delaware Life $751 million, which are small fractions of their overall portfolios. And Tom, let's establish this here before we go any deeper. Affiliated investments in and of themselves are neither bad things nor illegal. We have to understand about how insurance works. When people pay premiums, you have large amounts of cash, and it's not like that cash is just going to be sitting around. These insurance companies take it and reinvest it. Often, most often, they will reinvest it in companies they are not associated with, but sometimes you have those affiliated investments. When do they become problematic?
So there's really two issues. First, are you disclosing it truthfully? And second, is the investor benefiting in some way to the detriment of the policyholders? And obviously that's what I care about and have been, working hard for 41 years to make sure that doesn't happen. The problem is when you have a transaction between totally independent parties, you can presume arm's lengthness, that it'll be fair because they're going to each look after their own, right? And they'll have the information necessary. But if, for instance, Mark Walter is in Kansas and he calls Mark Walter in the Caymans, he could probably manage any kind of terms he wanted, right? So the NAIC, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, wants to be sure that you tell the truth, that you disclose if you are affiliated. And that doesn't mean just investments, but is your reinsurance affiliated? So the reason we need to know is because the NAIC says anytime you have a material transaction with any affiliate, it has to be on terms that are fair and reasonable. Well, how are we going to know that we need to scrutinize those transactions to make sure they are fair and reasonable if we don't know they are affiliated? So it's those two issues from my perspective.
And this, Tom, is becoming a more mainstream issue. I think a lot of people, this is a small segment of a much larger industry. But Amy Huber, who's an assistant professor of finance at Penn's Wharton School of Business, wrote a paper in June that outlined the whole strategy and concluded, quote, private equity owned insurers systematically channel capital to affiliated credit businesses on terms that favor the issuer and expose policyholders to more risk, end quote. And in February, according to Bloomberg, grand jury subpoenas were issued by the Southern District of New York to Delaware Life and ClearSpring. By late June, in regulatory filings, both submitted revised numbers. Delaware Life's affiliated investments, according to Alert, were actually not $750 million, but $18.3 billion. And ClearSpring's were $5.9 billion, upward of 40 and 50% respectively of their investments, Tom. And can you tell me, what's the threshold of affiliated investments that causes the NAIC to start asking questions about a company?
Well, the NAIC doesn't determine the statutes, but they offer guidance to the 51 jurisdictions, Washington, D.C., and the states. And in it, they strongly suggest that a life insurer not invest in affiliated paper more than the lesser of 10% of invested assets or 50% of surplus. And that surplus is that little buffer we have between a solvent company and an insolvent company. And in these cases, That 18 billion is radically higher than their surplus. So they are way over, actually, on both metrics, percent of invested assets and surplus.
And we have to understand, Tom, how life insurance and annuities for a long time worked. They were about as safe of an investment as you could get. And they were safe because these companies understood that they had obligations to their policyholders and that those obligations needed, by dint of the contract, to be paid out. At some point, someone's going to die. And if they have life insurance or if they have an annuity, there's going to be a payout there involved. And all of a sudden, after 2008, when financial companies started buying up these insurers, the investments got a lot riskier. They were not mutual insurance companies, for example, that keep them in safe bonds. No, these became more exotic investments. And while the total number of these affiliated loans have been reported slightly lower elsewhere, closer to $21 billion in affiliated investments from these two companies, whatever the number is, that matters because that is the ultimate number that Mark Walter has been required to make whole by year's end. Whether it's 21 billion, 24 billion, the point is the insurers had wildly understated their affiliated investments. How does that happen, Tom? Could this just be an honest mistake?
I suppose there have been instances in history where it was a mistake, but I don't see how it could be here specific to the Guggenheim Group and Mark Walter because of that civil complaint we filed back in 2014. In that, we alleged and explained why it's crucial to tell the truth with respect to affiliated and non-affiliated. That was one of the primary thrusts of that complaint. So here we are 12 years later, and it seems the allegations are the same, as if rather than learning their lesson, they doubled down, maybe got better at hiding that they're affiliated.
Yeah, and I'd like to look at a few of these affiliated loans because they tie back directly to something that has drawn the ire of fans for years now. And that's the Los Angeles Dodgers television deal. And all of this dates back to 2011. The Dodgers were, if you can believe it, bankrupt. Owner Frank McCourt had filed for Chapter 11 protection. The team went up for auction. Guggenheim bought the Dodgers for what at the time was a record for a sports franchise, $2.15 billion. And this was considered an exceptionally high amount. And even by the financial media, Walter got flayed for it. But he knew something that the public did not. The Dodgers' local television deal was expiring, and there was going to be a bidding war. And as part of the deal with the bankruptcy court, the amount of money the Dodgers would have to pay into revenue sharing the first season for their television contract was based on an $84 million valuation, which was about 40% of what they would eventually receive on the open market for that first year. Local TV money has separated the haves and have-nots in baseball for the last 2 decades. And not only would this be the mother of all local TV deals by money, but on top of that, because of the bankruptcy agreement, the Dodgers would pay a far lower proportion of their TV money into the shared pool than any other team. An MLB attorney tried to argue with the judge in bankruptcy court that this would make MLB, where it's, quote, the Dodgers and 29 other teams, end quote. The argument failed, and because the bankruptcy court's ruling supersedes any edict from MLB, the Dodgers have already saved $500 million of TV revenue. And that's not an exaggeration. The deal that was signed with Time Warner Cable to televise Dodgers games locally was for 25 years and $8.35 billion. MLB and the Dodgers eventually agreed after negotiation that in year one of the deal, the Dodgers would pay revenue sharing on $130 million as opposed to the $84 million that the bankruptcy court said. And around that time, the Los Angeles Times reported that Time Warner was paying about $1.5 million a game for 140 games. So let's do a little math here. Assuming the Dodgers actually received around $200 million in that first season, they would have been expected to contribute $68 million to a shared revenue pool into which every team paid 34% of its local revenues. Instead, because that number was $130 million valuation, the Dodgers were charged around $44 million or so. And that's nearly $25 million in year one that the Dodgers were supposed to share and that they wound up saving. In 2017, the new collective bargaining agreement bumped the share of local revenue to 48%. The Dodgers' savings jumped even more. Sportico reported that the Dodgers are expected to receive around $320 million in local TV money this year. And that number aligns almost perfectly with our estimates that start in year one at $200 million and account for a 4% annual increase. Under the rules in which they're paying full freight, the Dodgers this year would be charged around $150 million to put into that shared pool. Instead, they're expected to contribute around $100 million. You keep playing that out, and the numbers get even bigger. The final year of the deal, 2038, the Dodgers are reportedly going to exceed $500 million in local TV revenue. The savings of what they're going to pay on that compared to what they should are expected to be upward in that 1 year of $80 million. All in all, based on those numbers, the Dodgers, by the end of their TV deal, stand to save more than $1.3 billion in shared TV money. And all that as the regional sports network industry collapsed in baseball and the Dodgers' advantage grew even more profound. And if I can be clear for a second, that's what it was. It was an advantage, a big advantage. And that's vital to all this. As much as other teams could, and you can argue should, be more aggressive in their pursuit of a championship, that does not mean that any team can be just like the Dodgers. I have never said that. I never would say that because it's not true. I have said that other teams should try and emulate the Dodgers' desire to win, and that plenty have greater ability to do so than they choose to in reality. And I'll stand by that contention all day. Here's the thing, though. The Dodgers and the Mets are the only teams with gigantic financial enterprises backing their operations. Nick Nemeth, who runs the Mispriced Assets Substack, has done a tremendous job reporting on this story. He wrote the first substantive piece that tied together a number of the elements of Mark Walters' empire. And a week ago, he reported that nearly $1.5 billion of debt issued by American Media Productions, which is the company the Dodgers created to manage their television network, Sportsnet LA, is held by Delaware Life, ClearSpring, and 3 other insurance companies owned by members of the Dodgers ownership consortium. Delaware Life has $277 million in AMP debt. ClearSpring has $310 million. Another company owned by Todd Boehly, who was president of Guggenheim Partners until 2015 and is still a prominent face of Dodgers ownership, is called Security Benefit Life and has the largest ownership of the 5 at $371.5 million. Follow-up reporting by the Financial Times said that in turning the Dodgers TV rights into a debt deal, in essentially selling ownership of something that they themselves bought, Mark Walter recouped more than the $2.15 billion purchase price of the entire team. Let's focus on the affiliated investments, though. What does it tell you, Tom, that nearly $1.5 billion cash went from affiliated insurance companies right into the pockets of the Dodgers? And how would cash of that magnitude help a business like the Dodgers?
Okay, so this is where I start getting upset, frankly. Policyholder money is used initially to make the purchase, to aid in making that purchase. And that was in the form of debt instruments. As we go forward and the Dodgers begin creating significant revenue streams, we aren't seeing that benefiting the policyholders. And in my professional opinion, we look after the policyholders first, right? That's where all the premiums come from. So in this case, it looks like policyholders help get the thing started, but all they're going to get back is their payoff on the interest on the bonds. Whereas Walter and other investors will get that cream off the top.
The affiliated investments, Tom, did not end there. For multiple years, the Financial Times reported Delaware Life had loans to a company called Dodgers Tickets, LLC, that were marked as unaffiliated. And that, I think, is the part of this that stands out the most. It is either stupid or brazen. And Mark Walter might be a lot of things. Stupid's not one of them. The Dodgers purchase, for most, would be the deal of a lifetime, though Walter didn't just rest on its laurels. He leveraged it. And now it's impossible to say how much of the Dodgers record payrolls have come from any of the money that Dodgers affiliated companies have received from Guggenheim affiliated insurance firms. We don't have that. We cannot clearly point using the evidence, using financial documents, using public records. We can't make a one-for-one link there. The Dodgers, as a standalone baseball franchise, actually dwarf the rest of the sport in terms of the revenue that they're generating. And that comes in part because they've run the business a whole lot better than Frank McCourt did, seemingly. And that in December 2023, they signed Shohei Ohtani, perhaps the greatest player in history and certainly the most marketable baseball player in a generation, maybe multiple. And it supercharged their coffers. Not only were the Dodgers selling more tickets than every other team, they turned into an international marketing juggernaut. And in 2025, they became the first baseball team to generate more than $1 billion in revenue. It put them in rarefied territory for a sports franchise. Only other billion-dollar revenue teams have been the Dallas Cowboys, Real Madrid, and Barcelona.
Wow.
And at the heart of it is Ohtani's contract, the largest ever guarantee at the time at $700 million over 10 years. But it came with a twist. $680 million of it is deferred for 10 years with no interest, meaning the Dodgers are paying Shohei Ohtani $2 million in cash a year, and all the rest of that money is pushed off. It's not the only Dodgers contract with deferrals either. In total, the Dodgers will be paying their current players $1.1 billion between 2028, when their first deferral payment to first baseman Freddie Freeman is due, and 2047, when they owe their final deferral payment to closer Edwin Diaz, who will be 53 years old at the time. And last year alone, between payroll and penalties for shattering the competitive balance tax's highest threshold, the Dodgers paid $514.6 million. The Marlins, White Sox, Rays, Pirates, and A's payrolls combined were $508.9 million. And the Dodgers are doing it again this year. Ethan Houlihan does an incredible job of tracking payroll for his website and MLB Trade Rumors. And he estimates today that Los Angeles' payroll will be even higher than last year at $516.3 million. That is nearly $75 million more than the bottom 5 teams combined in 2026. Now, there are a lot of opinions and a lot of ignorance, Tom, on the Dodgers' deferrals and their impacts. What is the proper way to regard deferred salaries in the larger context of everything we know about the Dodgers?
That is a really interesting question. And technically, as you said earlier, there's nothing illegal about it. But as I think about it, I'm here today to express concerns for the policyholders. Why? Because they have really long-term promises. Some people buy a life insurance policy for their child at birth. So you could be looking at 100 years, literally. And so you've got to make sure that insurance company is solvent, not just today, but 100 years from now. That's why it has to be transparent. If you have affiliated investments, you need to disclose that. But as you told this about the deferral, it makes me feel like maybe I should be worried about Ohtani as well, because we're talking about a lot of years and there's a lot of uncertainty about these affiliated investments. And I'm curious to see if this is going to affect their ratings as well.
Yeah, and that's interesting because you look at the ratings agencies, Tom, and even though there is some consternation, they all say, hey, Guggenheim makes money. Guggenheim's investments do well. But as much consternation as the deferrals gin up among those other 29 teams that the MLB lawyer referred to more than a decade ago, it paled compared to what is happening to Guggenheim's reputation on Wall Street right now. Last week, the ratings agency S&P Global revised its outlook on Delaware Life to negative. The Wall Street Journal reported last week that the government is focusing on so-called intermediary businesses, ABS, Amistad Financial, Bradford Allen, and Hudson Trading, through which a number of loans owned by Walter's insurance companies pass through. Now, if indeed the government can show that Guggenheim and its insurance companies were trying to bypass designating loans as affiliated by funneling them instead through third-party intermediaries, that could put Walter in further legal jeopardy. And in an effort to quell concerns, Guggenheim held an investor call last week. It did not quell concerns. In fact, there's a company called GIH Borrower, which was created in 2024 and actually sits above Guggenheim Partners' $367 billion asset management business in the corporate structure. And in late 2024, GIH Borrower took a $1.175 billion loan. Now, here's the thing you have to understand about our financial industry. You can pretty much make bets on anything. You can pretty much trade anything. And these loans can be traded with one seen as especially safe, trading at par, dollar for dollar, essentially. In June, trades executed on GIH Borrower's loan were at par. A week ago, however, that number cratered from $1 to 80 cents. And on the investor call, Di Lorenzo, the president of Guggenheim Investments, said that a 38% drop in year-over-year revenue that the company had reported was due to advisory fees that had not been booked in the second quarter. They would, she said, be reflected in the third quarter, hopeful that it would placate the investors. The price of GIH Borrower remains around 80 cents. With that number, Tom, what is Wall Street saying about Guggenheim and its ecosystem?
Well, it's supply and demand. And apparently, a significant group believes that they have some doubt as to the long term viability of that particular investment and maybe the group. But now you see why I've spoken out. That can happen. And when the policyholder money, so much has been used to purchase similar affiliated investments, I have the same concerns. If it doesn't work out well, remember, everyone pays premiums to shed risk, right? You pay
Hmm.
premiums so you get rid of risk. It's always been that way. But today, it looks like they're taking on third party risk without even knowing it because it's not completely disclosed as it should.
Now, let's get one thing straight. Nobody, Tom, knows where all this is going. Guggenheim's $367 billion in assets under management is 51st among US firms. Huge, obviously, but mid-tier in the grand scheme of such firms.
Mhm.
We have no idea right now about how stable the Guggenheim empire really is. Yeah, all of this, Tom, feels big because it is. And what's scary is that the takeover of the insurance industry by private equity is not the only trick being foisted on the multi-trillion-dollar finance world. There's a product called reinsurance,
Mm.
which sounds like what it is, a loan or a package of loans that get bought up by an insurance company that's going to make a bet on them. It's essentially insurance inception. And while just as with affiliated lending, there are good reinsurance companies and good reinsurance products, there are also bad ones. Walk us through what you call sleight of hand reinsurance and how it relates to the Dodgers. And beyond that, if you could explain what you worry it can do to the economy writ large.
Sure. And this is a really important issue. And I appreciate the opportunity to share with you guys today. You help me reach a larger group in the general public. But reinsurance, when done properly, legally, makes the world go round. Reinsurance is brilliant. It helps insurance companies spread risk, right? You can take some of your risk and moving to that reinsurer and some to that one. But if it's not according to the law, if it is done in secret, if it is not transparent, then you have a problem. And what we've seen in throughout these groups of companies you've been talking about, and sadly, a lot of the for-profit private equity controlled carriers, is rather than ceding, say, to a big reinsurer in Switzerland who has its own money, uh, the majority of the reinsurance we're seeing today is literally internal. They're ceding, transferring risk to affiliated companies. So there is not this outside independent business partner who has its own money to be a backstop, right? And the statutes in all 51 jurisdictions require that when you do that kind of reinsurance, it has to be transparent. We have to be able to see that when, say, 10 billion in liabilities leaves this company in Kansas, is it still going to be set up properly on the other end, especially when it's in places like the Cayman Islands? So if you can't see the other end, I got to worry, just like on the affiliated investments. Is there a potential for self dealing? Is it not real transfer of risk? And I'm telling you, that is one of the greatest concerns, in my opinion. And I've been doing this 41 years. There is 1.5 trillion of this kind of reinsurance where it's internal, it's only with affiliates, and most of it you can't see the other end of the transaction. That's one of the things I wanted to share, but it does fit here with Walter and his companies. They have Cayman Island affiliates and all of that. So I know that's a little bit complicated.
Yeah, let's focus on the Dodgers specifically, because guess what? We can. Because remember when we were talking about the debt holders on the TV contract, one of the companies I mentioned is Security Benefit Life. And Tom, you took a look at Security Benefit Life's balance sheet. You saw more than $21 billion in affiliated investment compared to just $7 billion in surplus. That is 300%.
Right.
That is not a number you want at 300%.
Right.
It's potentially very problematic. What stood out to you most, though, maybe, was a subsidiary of Security Benefits called Sixth Avenue Reinsurance. What did the document show you, Tom? And what is it about these companies and other similar companies in the industry that trouble you?
This is serious business. This is what was at the core of the criminal cases that I've worked. Sixth Avenue Reinsurance Company is domiciled in Vermont. So you would think that their books are open, because remember, the policyholders whose risks are being transferred to that company in Vermont, they have every right to know how their money is being invested, and is it money good? Will they be able to collect, right? But in Vermont, Sixth Avenue Reinsurance Company is one of many what they call special purpose financial captives. And those captives are entirely secretive. You cannot get any information on, even if you're a policyholder of Security Benefit Life, you would think you should be able to see the financials of, by the way, a subsidiary of Security Benefit Life. Yet you can get nothing. I tried for 15 years to get financial statements and couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
So I dug through the financial statements, looking for things related to this Sixth Avenue transaction. And I believe you have a document that I shared with you that shows that if the Vermont commissioner had not given what is called a permitted practice, Sixth Avenue Re would be insolvent by a significant amount. Instead of being a large positive number, they would be a large negative number, putting them insolvent, meaning Sixth Avenue Re could no longer be counted on to pay claims for security benefit. That's why we need to know. But a permitted, I want everybody, if they don't learn anything else, if you learn that a permitted practice sounds okay, but it's actually where a commissioner grants permission to do something that is not permitted, literally. So you could never count the asset that that company has in Vermont on your books if you were a real insurance company. But a captive in Vermont is allowed to carry this thing called an XOL asset, which I know to be worth zero. The Society of Actuaries have it on their disallowed list. So these captives, you can't see what they're doing, and they're allowed to use things that never would be allowed on the insurance company itself.
Tom, why? Why is something like this allowed?
That's the tough question. I've been doing this 41 years, but I've been uncomfortable with going to Vermont, South Carolina, now Delaware has captives, Arizona, Iowa. Those are the main ones. I've been very concerned about that and concerned with going offshore. And I got increasingly loud over the last 5 years as I learned more and more about how we are exposed to that. We're looking at 1.5 trillion of these transactions where we can't see the other end. Yet I haven't been able to get a single state regulator to chime in and say, oh, maybe we should look at those. So I cannot give you an answer. It's very awkward and I'm uncomfortable for sure.
And Tom, you lived through the housing crisis. You saw what happens when an important, but in the grand scheme of things, how it's not like housing is 25% of the economy. It's a sliver of a much larger one. And we need bailouts to prevent the entire economy from collapsing. I'm not trying to be alarmist here,
Mm-mm.
but when you see something like this, where do you think it can potentially lead?
There is concern about systemia. In fact, you mentioned '08. In '08, Dodd-Frank enabled the federal government, the Treasury, to gain access to the books of certain life and annuity carriers. And they put out papers publicly that made clear that they were systemically important financial institutions. And they named all of these things we're talking about: lack of transparency, offshore reinsurance, conflicts of interest by the owners and how the money flows. They expressed concern on all of that and deemed them systemic risks. And I thought, finally, we're going to get something done here. And lo and behold, Chief Justice Antonin Scalia, you may recall Scalia, his son in Washington, D.C., brought a lawsuit on behalf of the life. Metropolitan Life was one of those that was deemed systemic. And he defeated the feds. The Treasury lost that case. And accordingly, all of that supervision that we were suddenly about to have faded away. So during that time period, things have gotten much higher risk and much less liquid, right? A baseball team might turn out great, and I'm glad, but some teams don't turn out great. How liquid could that be? Could you not even get paid back on the bonds, right? And if it's significant related to surplus, that's where you have a problem with the company failing. And I'm afraid that there is systemic risk interconnectedness among these life and annuity insurers, and also with private credit, private equity, you name it. So I'm not screaming fire in a crowded theater. I'm really not. But I'm saying we need to begin a dialogue of discussing what we're going to do here. And I'm proud of the Department of Justice for coming out with this so that we know that some of these entities are using a lot of policyholder money to benefit themselves to the detriment of policyholders.
Well, where we're left, I think, is back where we started. Can Mark Walter extricate himself from what Liz Hoffman in Semaphore called, quote, a dragon's nest of interlocking loans, end quote? The sale of the Lakers to Joshua Kushner, who's the brother of the president's son-in-law, and Bob Iger, the longtime CEO of the Walt Disney Company, which owns ESPN, certainly would take a chunk out of the $20 billion plus that Walter needs. Except that Jeannie Buss, the daughter of longtime Lakers owner Dr. Jerry Buss, is contesting the sale. And should Buss not relent and take her case to litigation, it could significantly delay any sale. Walter, in the meantime, continues to chase cash. Bloomberg reported that in efforts to raise money, he even pursued a deal with Point72, the firm of New York Mets owner Steve Cohen. Point72 rejected the entreaties, even though Bloomberg reported Walter is offering double-digit returns with some of his Guggenheim equity staked as collateral. John Orend at Puck reported that Walter was willing to offer to Charter Communications, which bought Time Warner in 2016, an end to the Dodgers' absolute sweetheart TV deal in exchange for an undisclosed lump sum payment. And if Walter can't secure the money elsewhere, he could be forced to start selling assets. He insists that it will not be the Dodgers. Walter is telling that to friends. He's saying that through Dodgers president Stan Kasten, who twice in the last week has held press briefings in which he repeated the point: the Dodgers are not and will not be for sale. If you were Mark Walter's lawyer, Tom, what would be your biggest concern right now?
Well, interestingly, it goes back to 2014. When we filed that complaint 12 years ago, we alleged that insurance executives really should not misrepresent an entity as being non-affiliated when they're really affiliated. Today, it seems that's what the Department of Justice is concerned about. So it makes you wonder during that time, how much can we count on the financial statements coming out of that group? And it's just looking tricky. I don't know how else to describe it. It's going to get sticky. It always does in a criminal matter like this.
Well, if the Dodgers were sold, it would make for a fascinating outcome.
It would.
Ohtani's contract, which despite its size is widely regarded in the industry as the team friendliest deal in baseball for all of the revenue he brings in compared to the paltry salary that he gets every year. That deal includes a key man clause, which means if Mark Walter or Andrew Friedman, the Dodgers president of baseball operations, leaves the team in the middle of Ohtani's deal, he can opt out of the contract. And considering how large a part Ohtani has played in the Dodgers franchise valuation growing to around $10 billion, how many of their deals are specifically tied to him? It's even more of a potential mess. But you know what? Getting here, the Dodgers and their owners have certainly laughed their way to the bank, because a $2.15 billion investment turning into $10 billion over 14 years, it's pretty good ROI, Tom, right?
Yeah, it's not bad, I have to say. I just wish it was for the policyholders.
Yeah, who does get those profits? Because we established at the beginning, more than half of the money used to buy the Dodgers, according to this complaint that was filed back in 2014, came from annuity policyholders.
That's right.
Do they get to enjoy the spoils as well?
I haven't seen any indication that they will, but also this is like a lot of the affiliated transactions. It often benefits the person in control, Mark Walter. It might benefit the person in control, but the policyholders, it's to their detriment. They don't understand all of these things or even going on, so they don't know to act on their own behalf.
A lot of us don't understand these things, and that's why we're trying to do this episode. And we're going to end back where this all began, with the purchase of the Dodgers, the creation of Guggenheim Baseball Management, and a prescient interview with Todd Boehly. Todd Boehly was the one who would eventually go on to structure the Dodgers TV deal. He still plays a vital role with the team, and he gave his first on-the-record interview as a Dodgers owner, December 15th, 2012, to Bill Shaken of the Los Angeles Times, who has written more about the Dodgers TV deal than anyone. In that interview, Todd Boehly said the following about Mark Walter. Quote, "At the end of the day, I think Mark is going to be one of the most enlightened owners in sports franchise history because of how thoughtful he is about how the pieces work together. Most importantly, he is not greedy. He's going to put the money in. He's going to make the investment on the field and in the park and in the facility and in the experience, because that's also what makes it worth the most money. So he is perfectly aligned with giving the fans the best experience, because that is what creates the most value. And after all this talk we've had, Tom, of value and investments and rates of return, Todd Bowley was asked how he would define successful ownership of the Dodgers. Quote, "You're not really asking me that, are you? The more World Series we win, the more valuable a franchise it is, right?" End quote. The Dodgers this year are trying to become the first National League team ever to win 3 straight World Series, Tom. They have the second best record and the second best run differential in baseball, behind only the team that they swept in the NLCS last year, the Milwaukee Brewers. The Dodgers are heavy favorites to win the World Series nonetheless. They are the focal point of Major League Baseball's argument in favor of a salary cap, which the MLB Players Association rejects and is expected to lead to a lockout December 1st that's going to last only God knows how long. And all of this is to suggest everything in the baseball world revolves around the Dodgers, Tom. Mm-hmm. And yet it's been more than a dozen years since you put together the case that they were bought with other people's money. In the meantime, the practice of affiliated investing, of putting the money of grandmothers and grandfathers everywhere into riskier positions, has only gotten worse. Who's to blame for this?
Boy, this is a tough answer, but I have to be candid. All of these things we've been talking about, all of the pitfalls of things that worry me most, really rest on the shoulders of the state regulators, the insurance commissioners. It's their job to protect the policyholders, not the carriers, the insurers themselves. They can take care of themselves. But we made a real fuss about affiliated investments need to be properly reported. And during that 12 years, it apparently just blossomed, not just within Mark Walters' group, but the entire private equity controlled ecosystem. The whole group of insurance companies controlled by them are doing lots of affiliated investing.
And we are left with the Los Angeles Dodgers in question, with the future unknown, and with so much more story left to be told. Tom Gober, thank you so much for your time, your insight, your expertise, and your effort on this matter. We'll see everyone next week.
Thank you.